Kiara Johnson was 16 years old, living in a small town in Michigan that often seemed quieter than it actually was. On the surface, her life looked ordinary: school, friends, family, weekend routines, but beneath the surface, her days were a constant negotiation with a world that seemed determined to define her by the color of her skin. Kiara was aware, sometimes painfully, that every glance, every whisper, every sideways remark carried a weight that others never seemed to notice. Even walking down the hallways of her high school felt like navigating an invisible obstacle course where one misstep could make her the target of judgment or ridicule. While her friends laughed freely and teachers praised their ideas without hesitation, Kiara often felt an invisible barrier that separated her, not because of who she was or what she could do, but because of the skin she was born in. Kiara's childhood was shaped by love at home and indifference, or sometimes hostility, outside of it. Her mother, Margaret, was a woman of quiet strength, always reminding Kiara that the world might see her skin before her heart, but that her value came from her integrity, intelligence, and perseverance. People may not treat you fairly, Kiara, but your worth isn't defined by them, her mother often said, holding her hand in the soft glow of the kitchen light while the rest of the house hummed with the mundane sounds of a normal evening. Her father, James, was hardworking, practical, and fiercely protective. He would often say, "Life is going to throw challenges at you, kiddo. Some of them are unfair, but your job is to meet them head-on." These words became both a shield and a reminder of the weight she carried, lessons meant to prepare her, but not to erase the pain of prejudice she faced daily. School, however, was where the weight of society pressed most heavily. Classrooms were supposed to be safe spaces for learning, for questioning, for growing, but Kiara often felt scrutinized, dismissed. School had always been a paradox for Kiara. On one hand, it was a place where she could nurture her mind, explore ideas, and imagine possibilities. On the other, it was a place where the color of her skin seemed to act like a permanent label, shaping how others perceived her even before she spoke. She had learned early to read the subtle cues that revealed bias. The way a teacher's smile faltered when she answered a question, the half-hearted applause when her project was presented, the hushed whispers in the hallway as she walked past. These small gestures accumulated into a mountain of awareness that weighed heavily on her shoulders. But Kiara was not someone who could be easily silent. She had cultivated an inner voice strong enough to counter the daily barrage of prejudice, though it often came at the cost of exhaustion, emotional strain, and isolation. Her circle of friends was small, chosen not by convenience but by careful observation. A few peers saw her for her intelligence, humor, and kindness rather than her skin color. Jasmine, a girl from her literature class, often stayed after school to debate novels with Kiara, and their conversations were a lifeline for her. "You have a perspective no one else can see," Jasmine once told her, her eyes bright with admiration. It was validation Kiara rarely received in the broader school environment, and she cherished it. But even within this small bubble of safety, she could not entirely escape the pressure of societal expectations. Friends sometimes hesitated to defend her when others mocked her, and she knew it was partly because they didn't want to draw attention to themselves. The isolation she felt wasn't just about being physically alone, it was about being constantly aware that many people either didn't understand or didn't care to understand her experience. One autumn afternoon, the weight of this awareness became almost unbearable. Kiara had been preparing for weeks for the school debate competition, a Topi. Life outside the walls of school was no less complicated for Kiara. Her small Michigan town was tightly knit, and while this closeness brought familiarity and comfort to some, it also magnified prejudice for those who did not fit the majority mold. Kiara noticed the subtle judgments as soon as she stepped off the school bus in the morning. Neighbors who greeted white students with friendly smiles often gave her a brief nod or no acknowledgement at all. In stores, clerks sometimes followed her eyes, assuming she might steal, even when her purchases were minimal and her behavior exemplary. These experiences were not isolated. They formed a constant backdrop to her life, reminding her that the world beyond her family home often operated on assumptions rather than understanding. At home, the tension between the outside world and the safe space of family sometimes spilled over into arguments, though never with hostility. Her father, James, struggled with a silent anger that he rarely voiced directly, but which manifested in firm warnings and protective strategies. "You have to be careful, Kiara. Not everyone will see your heart or your talent. Some people only see what they want to see," he would say, his voice low but insistent. Her mother, Margaret, approached the problem differently. She encouraged Kiara to channel her frustration into productive energy, teaching her the power of education, self-expression, and advocacy. While the guidance of her parents was invaluable, Kiara often felt trapped between caution and ambition, the need to protect herself and the desire to assert her rightful place in the world. The first real turning point came during a local community event. Kiara had been preparing a presentation on African American history for a youth initiative, a project that combined her love of research, her passion for justice, and her natural storytelling skills. When she arrived at the event, she noticed that the other presenters, mostly white students, were G. The following year marked a profound shift in Kiara's life. The cumulative experiences of discrimination, microaggressions, and outright prejudice had not broken her spirit, they had sharpened it. She had begun to see herself not merely as a passive observer in a biased society, but as an agent capable of change, both within her own life and in the broader community. Each act of courage, whether speaking up in class, mentoring younger students, or challenging unfair policies, had created ripples that spread further than she had imagined. These victories were not always celebrated by others, and often came with pushback, but Kiara had learned that validation was secondary to the act of resistance itself. The act of standing firm, of asserting her voice, was transformative in itself, and it began to reshape her identity from one defined by limitation to one defined by resilience, agency, and purpose. One particular moment crystallized this transformation. The school district had announced a diversity initiative intended to promote inclusion, yet the initial plan was superficial, offering token gestures rather than substantive change. Kiara, drawing on her experiences and her growing network of allies, organized a series of town hall meetings. She invited students, teachers, parents, and community leaders to participate, encouraging honest dialogue about systemic bias, inequities, and the lived experiences of marginalized students. The meetings were tense at first. Some adults dismissed her concerns, some students whispered doubts, and a few outright opposed her ideas, but Kiara's calm persistence gradually commanded attention. She presented carefully documented research, personal stories, and concrete suggestions for meaningful change, refusing to be sidelined or minimized. By the end of the first session, the room was quiet, a palpable awareness settling over the attendees as they listened to a 16-year-old girl speak with clarity, authority, and conviction. Her